Hello everyone, and welcome to another $30 budget vintage deck tech. So today we are talking about something I'm really excited about, and that's Mono Blue Affinity, or Mono Blue 8-cast, as we'll see. And I'm so excited about it. I think it may actually be kind of jumping in line as far as the content that I have lined up, because I just played this yesterday and it felt very, very strong. I'm really excited about this deck, but there's a little bit of history here before we see what I played yesterday. So what we're looking at right here is a list that one of my friends played in an online tournament we hosted earlier this year. As you can see, it's currently clocking in at $23.65. That is because this was on our old pricing. We switched to TCG Player Low, so that kind of ended up affecting us and giving us some additional budget. So this deck would be underpriced today, but this is what he played, and it kind of shows the strength of it. I think he got second in our tournament, losing a really close match to Mono Red Blitz. So looking at this list, you'll notice that Affinity for artifacts is legal in our format, and we know the rules on cost reducing. Delve is good, Affinity is good. If you're allowed to play them, you should probably check them out and see if you can enable them. I think that this list is going to be pretty familiar to anyone who's played any Affinity-style deck in any format. So I probably won't spend a ton of time talking about that. We're playing cheap artifacts. We're playing things like Frogmite and Thoughtcast, which both have Affinity for artifacts, so they will let us dump our hand quickly and draw cards with Thoughtcast. We have cheap artifacts that make mana, like Springleaf Drum and Moonsnare Prototype, so we're kind of ramping in that way. We also have Sol Ring, because again, this is budget vintage, so we get to play one Sol Ring. Thankfully, it's not more. So this list is playing 4 Cranial Plating, because that's really the... do not love that art. But this list is playing 4 Cranial Plating. That's really the biggest payoff. Best way to kill your opponents, I would say, in addition to Master of Ethereum. 3 mana for a creature that has keyword large. It has a lot of power and toughness. Emery's kind of a budget, kind of a choice to spend some of the budget on 3 of them. They look really good. You can play turn 1 or 2 Emery fairly often, and then at that point you're just getting value every turn from it. Gingerbrute wears a Cranial Plating really well. It also wears counters from Steel Overseer very well. So all that plays well together, and you're kind of backed up by the card advantage from Thoughtcast. But then one thing that's really interesting, and again, we're playing budget vintage, you get 1 copy of Tinker. So my friend was playing that. Very funny. Playing Tinker and Sol Ring in the same deck is obviously very powerful, and it gives you a really good chance to have, or it gives you a small chance to have very powerful draws. Because your hand has Sol Ring and Tinker, which I've played against it with both those cards. It's pretty darn good. So his Tinker targets that he's playing were Inkwell Leviathan, just as a very hard to interact with large creature. And I love this one, God Pharaoh's Gift. This card is awesome. It is very interesting to me, and I would like to see it a little bit more. There are ways to cheat it out, so maybe it's worth exploring that. But anyway, as a Tinker target, it plays well with Emery, actually in a couple ways, because if you do reanimate an Emery with it, the Emery will mill, which can then set you up for your future God Pharaoh's Gift triggers, or Emery can just tap and do the Emery thing. So I think that's very strong. It's probably a continuing question for me of whether the Tinker package is worth it in this deck. It's not a lot of slots. It's really just Tinker and then potentially like Inkwell Leviathan or God Pharaoh's Gift. But depending on the exact build of the rest of the deck, I think that could or could not be worth it. Then his sideboard was 2 Annuls. Just a catch-all for whatever unfair strategies might be out there. I remember leading up to this tournament, a lot of us were talking about Pyromancer's Ascension, which is a deck that I think is still just very strong. We haven't seen it on the channel, but I think it's very interesting. I think there's a build that's very good. Then Metallic Rebukes, just as a catch-all. The deck, like I said, the deck did really well. It turns out Cranial Plating on an Ornithopter or a Gingerbrute is nuts. One of the things we talked about in our Blue, White, and Soul videos is that Gingerbrute is basically not blockable. You do have to pay a little bit of mana, but Gingerbrute wears a Cranial Plating pretty well, and you can actually, if you have enough mana, you could hypothetically deploy both the Gingerbrute and the Plating from your hand and send them into your opponent on the same turn. So yeah, like I said, my friend played this deck and it did really well, and I wanted to revisit it now that we have additional budget because we changed some things. So what I did is I tinkered with it and I put together this list. Looks very similar. We're actually a little over budget right now, but you know, you can always fix that. But a lot of things changed. So like I said, the core of his list was only $23. It was also pre-Brothers War, so it was probably more, you know, when he registered it. But Brothers War, because of the old border printing, you can see the Ornithopter right there. It brought down the prices on Ornithopters, Springleaf Drums, maybe Cranial Plating, I don't remember. And we also had the Commander decks that brought in Old Border Seat of the Synod, which is a big deal. So all those things dropped a lot. In addition to that, like I said, we got additional budget from switching to TCG Player low pricing, and Brothers War also brought us Forging the Anchor. Now, I think this card is very, very powerful. It's Lead the Stampede, but for artifacts. We'll circle back to that, but I think it was worth revisiting. So in this deck, we spent our money on some additional really powerful tools. Notably, and this is insane, I kind of still can't believe this, we are able to play 4 Seat of the Synod. I think that's actually a Jumpstart printing that it's showing right there, because I'm pretty sure when I started looking at this deck, a playset of seats was $4, so $1 a piece, and now they're down to $176. So I think that logo there, I think that's a Jumpstart printing, which I guess would have just come out 2-3 days ago as of the time I'm recording this video. Insane being able to play the best artifact land for so little money. We are also able to afford 4 Thought Monitors, taking us really from being a mono blue Affinity deck to being 8-cast. Like 8-cast. The modern and legacy powerhouse. Obviously we're missing, you know, some Urza Sagas and some Force of Wills if we're the legacy version, but we have 8 casts. That's crazy to me. For just about $8, you know. Thoughtcast a little under 4, Thought Monitor a little above. And then I think this is the craziest addition to this deck, truthfully. I'm not sure it's the best or most important. Thought Monitor is probably the most important, but this just blows my mind every time I see it. 2 Kappa Cannoneers for $8.70. A full playset runs you about $15, $16. I don't know that you can fit that in and make the deck be good. But I'm really interested in playing 2 of them right now. I started brewing a list that the first thing I did was add 4 Kappa Cannoneers, and I said, I'm going to make 4 Kappa Cannoneers work, and whatever has to happen in the rest of the list is what's going to happen in the rest of the list. I ultimately ended up discarding that. I just don't think that's the right number, and I did playtest this list some. So I played this at our local tournament on Saturday. We just had a small group. We just had 4 of us, so we were just hanging out, jamming games. Kind of, you know, we didn't do, you know, prize support or anything. We just jammed games, and I got to jam, I don't know, 6 or 8 matches worth of games at least. And I did find that Kappa Cannoneer having Improvise instead of Affinity was a big deal. It is a 6-cost card. You can tap your Ornithopters and things to help pay for it, but especially without having Psi Master Thopterist in this deck in the same way that Legacy has it, 6 is still a big number, and it's not truly Affinity, it's Improvise. So I'm pretty good on the number being 2 for right now, but I kind of got ahead of myself. I'm just so excited about Kappa Cannoneer, and I'll be honest, that's part of why I'm recording this today and potentially jumping it up the line as far as bringing content to YouTube, actually, because I'm so excited about this deck. Anyway, let's step back a little bit. I know I'm a little bit over budget right now. I would just trim sideboard cards or, you know, adjust some stuff in here. But like I said, this is what I played. So here, let me give you my thoughts, and then we'll talk about what I would change. And then in the next tab over, we'll actually look at, you know, how I think that list would look. So kind of a 3 for the price of 1 deck today. I was trying Merchant's Dockhand. My thought here was that since we're only on 2 cranial platings instead of 4, Gingerbrute goes down a little bit in value, and We increased the number of Springleaf Drums and Moonsnare prototypes up to the full 8. I think there was just 7 previously for budget reasons. I thought that maybe having the additional mana, I thought maybe we'd have to look to find our payoffs, because we're playing the 8 Thoughtcasts and the 4 Forging the Anchors as what I'm kind of considering our main payoffs or our card advantage engines. Then we're also playing, I guess you'd say Cranial Plating is a payoff for the strategy, and so is Kappa Cannoneer. So I just thought that Merchant's Dockhand would be mostly just a 1 mana way to get an additional artifact into play for our affinity count, and then sometimes you would tap it to, search for one of those cards. I think there was one time where I considered maybe, using a Merchant's Dockhand, like maybe I had the mana, maybe it was the right play. I think I managed to draw a Thought Monitor or something and get out of it that way, but this card wasn't super impressive. I don't know if I would play it. The Ginger Brutes, I think you want to be at 4. I think I trimmed 1 potentially partially for budget, but yeah, I would play 4 Ginger Brutes. They're just really good at what they do. They chip in for a lot of damage. I mean, I had one game where I was playing against my buddy on Delver, and I really didn't have much going on, but I had 3 Ginger Brutes, and I had an empty hand, so every turn I was just paying 3 mana and chipping in with 3 Ginger Brutes. He had to spend real removal spells on them, and eventually they were able to peck him down, and I won the game. So Ginger Brute's great. Patchwork Automaton. Okay, so this is a little bit of a budget investment. I think we've seen this in some of my buddy Andrew's brews, his Blue, White, and Soul he plays it in. This card's pretty crazy. I think there was some point where I thought this was a 3-drop, and it's just not a 3-drop. It's a 2-drop. It's crazy. So Ward has played better than I expected. When I was testing on Saturday, my opponent multiple times said, Lightning Bolt your Patchwork Automaton. And I said, you can't do that. You don't have 3 mana. Which I know, like, at competitive REL, it would have been countered and all that, but, we're friends, so... Anyway, Ward 2 is awesome because we are playing a format that has Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, etc. So, the thing that I like about Patchwork is it's a 2-mana threat, and if your opponent tries to answer it with 1 mana removal, you spend 2 mana on the Patchwork, and they spend 1 mana on removal plus 2 mana on Ward. So you're actually kind of getting ahead. Whereas, if this were like, let's say an Etched Champion, right? Because... Sorry, not Etched Champion. We'll talk about that later, maybe. Master of Ethereum. Master of Ethereum is also a big guy, but it's 3 mana to play. It is always power and toughness equal to the total number of artifacts you have. So it's a little bit better if it comes down after you dumped your hand, whereas Automaton is only good if you play it before you dump your hand. But you're investing 3 mana into a Master of Ethereum, and then if your opponent is able to like Swords to Plowshares it, they've spent 1 mana, you've spent 3 mana. I'm not sure that's the equation that we want. Whereas Automaton, I spend 2 mana, my opponent bolts it, they spend 3 mana. So the numbers just seem better to me in that capacity. Also, Forging the Anchor really. It feels like it takes up a lot of 3-drop space, and I found that it was super worth casting every time. Again, here's Forging the Anchor. It was super worth casting every time I drew it, honestly. It just, sometimes I had to, make the conscious choice that my turn was going to be casting a Forging the Anchor and not doing that much else, because we don't have that many 0-drops in the deck, really just the Ornithopters, well, and Frogmites and Sojourner's Companions, but, Frogmites, I think, I'm going to describe them as a necessary evil. I think that you just need... you need them to be a free artifact that helps you bridge from having a low affinity count, like a 2 or 3, up to getting an affinity count of 6 and 7 for Thought Monitor, Sojourner's Companion, or even Thoughtcast. I don't think you can not play Frogmites. Like, obviously, I would rather max out on Sojourner's Companions and Myr Enforcers first. Which, by the way, anyone who builds a deck like this, Myr Enforcer is the same card as Sojourner's Companion, except it costs like 2 times as much, and it doesn't have artifact land cycling. So if you're going to build this deck, max out on Sojourner's Companions before you play a single Myr Enforcer, unless your metagame is overrun with Detention Spheres, I guess. So anyway, Frogmite I think is just a necessary enabler. But, so noticing again, we have 6 artifact lands in our deck. You could maybe go up on Darksteel Citadels, but I do think we need blue mana, because ideally our turns involve casting multiple Thoughtcasts or Thought Monitors in the same turn. So even once you discount them, you're still paying blue mana for them. And also note that Moonsnare Prototype, you do have to pay blue for it. It's not the same as Springleaf. You pay blue to play it, and you only get colorless out of it, whereas Springleaf is the opposite. You pay whatever color to cast it, or no color, and then it can actually make blue for you. So I don't think we can go up to the 4 Darksteel Citadel, even if budget would allow. I think 2 is the correct number. Man, I'm all over the place on this. I'm just really excited. I keep getting sucked into different tangents. But really, the biggest thing is Forging the Anchor. You know, this is a card that I have seen some people, like I've seen Caleb Durward testing it in Legacy Painter. I've heard Aspiring Spike talk about it in Modern. This card is on people's radar, and I think this card is very, very good. Luckily, I'm not really worried about price fluctuations with it because it isn't uncommon from a standard set, so I don't think it'll ever really be much more than it is, even if it does, you know, see a lot of play. But this card is absurd. Again, it's Lead the Stampede, so you look at the top 5 cards, you take any number of artifacts. It is a 3-mana sorcery, which is a bit of an investment, but that's okay. And so I was running the numbers on a hypergeometric probability calculator or whatever. Basically, you can plug in different variables like the number of successes and your sample size. You can figure out things like, you know, what are the odds that you draw 2 lands in a 7-card hand if you're playing, you know, 23 lands in a 60-card deck. So if you guys don't know what that is, maybe I'll find a way to put a link somewhere, and we'll talk about it more later because it's a really useful tool. But the main takeaway is with 42 artifacts in your deck, which is what we currently have here, because the only non-artifacts we have are Thoughtcasts, Forging the Anchors, and 10 Islands, right? So having the 6 artifact lands really helps. But with 42 artifacts, Forging the Anchor gets 3 cards. I think I should have brought the actual numbers. But it gets 3 cards like 35% of the time, 4 cards like 20% of the time, and 5 cards like 15% of the time. And it's like a 2% chance to get 1 card off of it. This card digs far. I don't know if casting this on turn 3 was the thing to do, but sometimes you would cast it on turn 3 and set up for a very, very powerful turn 4. Or sometimes you would kind of dump everything else in your hand, and this would be your last card that would help you gas back up. So not only are you getting like a big mass of just artifacts, right? Because this is a critical mass deck. It's Affinity. If someone were to blow up a lot of our artifacts or like Pyroclasm us and kill all of our Gingerbrutes and Ornithopters, Forging the Anchor is a way that we can get back in the game and keep, you know, churning through our deck and having a really high velocity, which is what this deck wants to do. And that plays really, really well with the Patchwork Automatons, which is why I chose this as one of my primary threats. Because we're just seeing so many artifacts, these get huge fast. These were very regularly, 5/5s or 7/7s with Ward too, which is crazy. They don't have any evasion, which I don't love. I wish they were a cranial plating a little bit better. Like, you know, maybe they could have trample if their power was 5 or greater or something crazy like that. But no, the card performed really well, and it played really well with Forging the Anchor and the whole 8-cast Thought Monitor thing. Companion was very good. I would consider going up in those. And then Kappa Cannoneer. This card, I'm not sure if it's going to stay in the deck for a long time. I think initially I was just really enamored with the fact that I could play this Legacy powerhouse. Like, you guys have seen Legacy. You know, this card's insane in Legacy. So I can play one of the most potent threats in Legacy in my format, my $30 vintage format, right? So I really wanted to do that. I don't know if it's actually worth putting $8.70 into. With that additional money, we could be doing things like playing Signal Pests or Vault Scourges. We already have our seats at the Synods, so that doesn't matter. But we could dedicate some more money to our sideboard. Maybe play some Emeries. I think Emery is something we're lacking in this list, potentially. Or we could go the Tinker route, but we'll talk about that when we look to my potential changes. I will say Kappa Cannoneer was insane. It's insane. It was regularly 10 power or more the turn it was ready to attack, because notably it triggers itself when it enters, so it's naturally a 5/5 is what I'm saying. doesn't actually feel like that's how the card was supposed to be designed. I feel like it was supposed to say whenever another artifact enters, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, this card's a very big, very unblockable threat. So it wears a cranial plating really, really well, which seems like overkill, but it's really not. It just kills your opponent. And the thing that I like about it, compared to suiting up a Ginger Brute with a cranial plating or putting a cranial plating on an Ornithopter, Ornithopter and Ginger Brute both die to Lightning Bolt or Swords to Plowshares. When you put cranial plating on a Kappa Cannoneer and you go to attacks, assuming you triggered it, right? It's not blockable. You can be fairly confident you're going to connect with your opponent because Ward 4 is insane. That is so much mana to pay. And I know it's obvious what it does, but I just really want to give it some perspective because it felt way better than I even expected. Ward 4 basically turns one of the best removal spells in the game, Swords to Plowshares, into a 5 mana instant, which, guys, I play a lot of limited, and I don't want to play a 5 mana exile target creature spell in a lot of my limited decks. That's how good Kappa Cannoneer is. So the card really is incredible. I do think it has a home here. I'm just not sure that it's necessarily worth it. I will say that we do dig to it pretty well. We see a lot of cards every game. The amount of velocity you have in this deck is just unreal. And again, the 2 Kappa Cannoneer, that's part of the reason I wanted to try the 2 Merchant's Dockhand. I thought maybe with only having 2 of what I considered my best threat, Merchant's Dockhand would be relevant for finding the Cannoneers. Again, it was really just the deck was consistent enough with the 8 Thoughtcast effects and the Forging the Anchor, which also hits one of the Thoughtcast effects. The Merchant's Dockhand just didn't matter. I will say, while I'm on the subject of things that do or do not matter, let's read Moonsnare Prototype. It's mostly a bad Springleaf Drum, but it does have this channel ability. And the channel ability is non-land permanent. It's not just a creature or a planeswalker. And I was testing some against the Troll Worship deck, which I recorded a deck tech for. I don't know which one of these is going to come out first. I haven't decided yet because, again, I'm really excited for this mono blue Affinity stuff, so I may just jump it to the front of the line. But I won multiple games off the back, multiple game ones off the back of Moonsnare Prototype, bouncing my opponent's Worship so that I could kill them despite having creatures in play. And if it didn't have the channel text, I would have been cold to it game 1. Game 2 I did have some sideboard to it, but game 1 I would have been cold. So anyway, sideboard, let's talk about that for a little bit. I will admit I just had some dollars to spend when I was getting ready to pick up this list, and I didn't put a ton of thought into it, so it does need some work. Spellbomb is just interaction. It's also an artifact, which I like because it helps us keep our affinity count up. Because one of the things, I haven't played a ton of this archetype in this format or other formats, but you can't trim on a ton of your little fiddly creatures because you just have to keep your affinity count high, because it's the name of the deck, so you have to do it. For annuls, this is for, again, Troll Worship, Pyromancer's Ascension, that sort of thing. Machine over Matter kind of fulfills a similar role, but is probably worse. It's a new card, so I wanted to test it. I do like it. I was playing against mono white soldiers, and I was able to... I boarded it in for a couple of reasons. They play Preeminent Captain, which lets them cheat a big soldier into play. Also, by the way, mono white soldiers is a real deck in this format. It's actually really, really good. It didn't change a ton with Brothers War, but it did maybe get better. I don't know, it affected the budget of it, so it's kind of weird, but the deck is great. I'll probably get the creator and pilot to play some games so I can get it on the channel, but it is a very real deck. Anyway, Machine over Matter interacted well with the creatures. It bounced to Thalia and let me kind of have, a big turn with Forging the Anchor, so it was good. Metallic Rebuke is a card that I like to put in lists, but I'll be honest, every time I've seen it played, it's been very middling. Maybe if it had Affinity instead of Improvise, but, it's here. Weathered Runestone is what I chose as my graveyard hate because it's also a Containment Priest effect. I I'm not sure I cared for it. I would probably just switch these to Tormod scripts going forward. I think we're fast enough that as long as we don't die to like Cephalid Breakfast on turn 2 or turn 3, or have something crazy reanimated, I think we can actually just beat most decks that Containment Priest effects are good against. So anyway, that's the deck. I think it's really crazy. Let me show you guys how I would change it if I were to play in a tournament tomorrow. Again, we're 1 cent over here. I would just trim and annul or something to get down to it. Biggest thing, so I went up to 4 Ginger Brutes. I slipped 1 Combat Courier in, so I went up in a Ginger Brute and up in a Combat Courier to replace the 2 Dockhand, Merchant's Dockhands that I cut. I don't know that Combat Courier is the right 1-drop here. There's a couple different ones I'll talk about at the end that I have saved down in the considering section that, you can't see. That's interesting. Okay. I don't know if Combat Courier is great, but it is a 1-drop that is an artifact, so it's fine. Yeah, I kept the numbers on Cranial Platings and Automatons the same. Thought Monitors, Companions, all of this is the same. I trimmed down the sideboard a little bit to get 2 Tormod's Crypts in, and that's really about it. I think this deck's very good. I think I would play it pretty close to exactly like this. Honestly, I think this may very well be the best deck. This deck's absurd, truly. I think that if you were to play in a big tournament, like a Win-a-Box or something, I think you would need to have a plan to beat this deck, or something similar to it, or you would play this deck yourself. I think those are the 2 options, truthfully. Looking at this, these are all cards that I'm kind of thinking about. So 1-drops, you do need a critical mass of 1 and 0 drops just to get Affinity rolling. Signal Pest is pretty good at carrying a Cranial Plating, and it also pumps our Ginger Brutes and our Ornithopters for a little bit of chip damage, so I like that. Spectrum Sentinel is a new card. I think this would maybe be a meta call, depending on what kind of answers you're seeing. Like if there's a lot of Lightning Helixes or, I don't know, Shardless Agents around to block or something, maybe this would be a decent card to carry a Cranial Plating. One card I didn't include is Stonecoil Serpent. That card also would be good. I forget how much it is. I think it's a little too much for my current version, which, again, anytime I say something costs too much money, we really got to start looking at Kappa Cannoneers, because we could trim them. We could go to 1 or no copies, and the deck would still be good. This is, one of the best game-ending threats, but I'm not sure that the deck needs it. You could just, cut 2 Kappa Cannoneers for 2 Cranial Platings, and it's kind of the same thing. You know what I mean? I'm not sure it's worth the expenditure here, but man, do I like playing that turtle. Continuing on, I think Blackstaff is an okay threat. It's pretty powerful. It turns our Junkie, Ornithopters, and Ginger Brutes into 4/4s. We can animate a Darksteel Citadel to live through board wipes. It kind of, again, it attacks on a different axis because this deck is a little bit soft to board wipes because we're just kind of vomiting our hand. So I actually think that some of these are probably really good. Vault Scourge, it's in the 2 mana value section, but it's really a 1-drop. It flies and it has lifelink, so it wears a Cranial Plating really well. I think that's always worth considering. Mer Enforcers, I think maybe you could go up to 4 Companions and then maybe some number of Enforcers. I'm not sure, though. I haven't played enough of this deck to really get a good feel for how your Affinity count develops throughout a game. So, obviously it's more powerful for all the Frogmites to be Mer Enforcers, but if you can't cast them for free or for 1 or 2 mana, because they cost 7 instead of 4, then you don't get your Affinity count up to 5 and 6 for Thought Monitors, and, it's a whole problem. So, I don't know. We can tinker with the numbers a little bit. Someone who plays more Affinity than me can probably weigh in, and probably has a way better perspective than I do. Tinker. So this one's weird, right? Because we're playing a blue artifact deck, and we're allowed to play 1 Tinker. It's not prohibitively expensive because it's not legal in any format, really. So why wouldn't we play it? And the question you got to ask is, why would we play it? We have a lot of bad artifacts to sacrifice, like Ornithopters or Springleaf Drums. But what are we getting? Like, what are we putting into play off of a Tinker? Kappa Cannoneer is obviously pretty good. So maybe you go down to 1 Kappa Cannoneer and you Tinker for it sometimes. That's kind of cool. I like that, potentially. Tinkering for a Thought Monitor gets you a flying threat for your cranial plating, and you draw cards. It's a divination that makes a 2/2. That's kind of good. But it's not like... It's not crazy, you know? You're not making cartoon noises. Ooga, you know? I do think that Mystic Forge is an option. This card is also restricted, so we might as well jam it in our deck, right? This card's very strong. We could probably have some big turns with it. Someone in a Discord I'm in suggested it, and I was initially kind of dismissive, and I will apologize for that because, yeah, this is worth thinking about for sure. Again, I think you do kind of get off the Cannoneers, but I'm not sure you need Cannoneers to close out the game. So I think like if you did play Tinker, you could play Tinker, 1 Mystic Forge, and cut 1 Cannoneer, and cut 1 of something else. I think that would be a super reasonable direction to go. And I like that better than putting Inkwell Leviathan or Bolas's Citadel into your deck. Okay, so first off, don't play Bolas's Citadel in this deck because you have so many 7-drops. You know what I mean? Like, just because you're reducing Thought Monitor and Sojourner's Companion with Affinity doesn't mean it doesn't cost 7 life off Bolas's Citadel. So as much as I want to tinker for Bolas's Citadel, we're not going to do that here. And I don't want to play Inkwell Leviathan because casting it seems hard. Godpharaoh's Statue is interesting. In some games, you could cast it, or Godpharaoh's Gift. Godpharaoh's Gift. But it is hard to cast. So I think Mystic Forge is my favorite tutor target. So yeah, maybe I will try that, a Mystic Forge Tinker version. I also was thinking about Ethereum Sculptor as kind of maybe like the Combat Courier and 1 Gingerbrute slot. I know it's 2 mana instead of 1, and I was talking about how much you need 1-drops to get out ahead fast, but I found myself casting Forging the Anchor or Thought Monitor or Thoughtcast, and I was getting a lot of Springleaf Drums and Gingerbrutes stuck in my hand. Not stuck, like I'll cast them next turn, but stuck like I want to dump my hand right now. I want to go fast. I want to storm off. So maybe a couple of Ethereum Sculptors, which it is an artifact creature and it reduces artifacts, so it's kind of like 2 Affinity. It would be good with Mystic Forge, and your Springleaf Drums are then mana positive off of a Forging the Anchor, which because we don't have like Lotus Petals or Mox Opals, that's something that we're missing. I will say I have a really, some would say unhealthy tendency to want to turn every deck into a Storm deck, if that's possible. And I do think that Ethereum Sculptor would help us get a little stormier, so I'm interested in like an Ethereum Sculptor version, and I'm interested in a Mystic Forge version. So, I don't know. We got to think about that. And sideboard, yeah, I just switched over to Tormod's Crypts from the other pieces of Grave Hate, because again, it's a 0-drop artifact, so it is inherently better than a 2-drop artifact, I guess. The last card I have been considering to talk about is Fade from History. This is a new card from Brothers War. It's very cheap, and it is a Fracturing Gust effect, because Fracturing Gust is something like $4 or $5, and it's 5 mana. So I don't think that Fracturing Gust is really in our format. Like, you're not going to play it in the same way you could in Modern. So I think Fade from History actually came at a really good time, because as someone who just played this deck, I don't see myself winning a game where the opponent casts a Fade from History. That seems really, really hard. So I do think this might become the premier sideboard option, which is good because I will be honest, guys, I was thinking about this deck as I was going to bed last night, and I do think that a version of this deck, like if a player who's better than me put more time into tuning it, I think this deck might be ban worthy. Not the whole thing, but like I think we would have to think about banning something, which I really wouldn't want to do because I like that we just use the Vintage banned and restricted list. Like I wouldn't want to separate out our format's ban list. So I think that I'm hoping Fade from History and like Shatterstorm effects and like Ancient Grudge can keep this deck in check, because I would hate to have to ban something from it, or I guess restrict something from it, right? That's what we do here. So yeah, anyone locally who plays, keep this card in mind for your sideboard, because I'm going to be playing a lot of this deck at locals, and I don't want this deck to be too dominant. I also think Fade from History is good against enchantment-heavy decks. I've been having a lot of conversations about brewing Enchantress lately with like Solitary Confinement, Enchantress's Presence, that kind of thing, and Fade from History seems really good against that as well, especially a Sterling Grove version of Enchantress, so I don't know, just keep this card in mind as you're building your sideboards. I think it's very, very worth including. So I know this was longer for a deck tech, but I kind of wanted to go through all three of these versions. Let me know what you guys think about kind of this long form deck tech. I like recording them. It's kind of gets a little bit rambly, but I like to ramble. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you have an idea for how you would build this deck, maybe tweaking the number of Mirror Enforcers or Frogmites, let me know. I'm all ears to it. Like I said, I'm not a huge Affinity player. I will say I'm kind of getting addicted to the explosiveness of it. Like I might goldfish a few games by myself after this just for fun. And I will say, guys, Moxfield does have a playtest setting up here, which if you've never seen it, it's kind of awesome. It is just an open space for you to play test. Oh, darn it. I just realized something. So, I was going through this considering section, and you couldn't see a couple of the cards because of where my video is. So anyway, here's those cards you missed. Sorry about that. I'm still new at this. But yeah, that wraps up our deck tech. I think this deck's awesome, and I actually think what I'm going to do now is move my camera somewhere. And I'm actually going to go ahead and, just because I'm so excited about it, I'm going to goldfish a couple hands just for you guys. Definitely, if you're not interested in seeing me slowly goldfish this, because I'm not super fast on Moxfield, I prefer goldfishing in paper. But for those of you that do want to kind of see how this plays out, who maybe haven't seen this kind of thing before, I'll put a couple in here. So yeah, I guess that's what we'll do right now. Looking at this hand, I think I would mulligan this 4 Thoughtcast Effects, 1 land Gingerbrute. So you really want to think about how quickly you get to casting a Thoughtcast. And here we're putting a land and one of these artifacts into play on turn 1. Turn 2, we play the Springleaf Drum, and assuming we don't have a land, we're still not casting a Thoughtcast. I don't know, maybe this hand is good. It really depends. We have a lot of draws that are decent. I'm going to mulligan it, though. Let's not think too hard. Let's just move on with the content. This hand's fine. It kind of gets bailed out by these being artifact lands. So I'll move this to the bottom. Let's say that we're on the play here. So this hand's going to take a moment to get going, but I'm going to lead on a seat. I'll draw for the turn. Sojourner's Companion's a good draw. Play another seat. Now our affinity count is 2. So I'll pay 2 mana. I'll cast a discounted Frogmite. And we'll go to the next turn. Now here on turn 3, we'll play our 3rd land. Our affinity count is 4. So I can play a Frogmite. Is there any reason to wait? I think the only reason to wait would be if I think I'm going to put it into play after a Patchwork. But, okay, so here we actually do have an impasse here. I could cast Thoughtcast for 1 mana, which would potentially allow me to like set up for a Thought Monitor after that. But if I spend 1 mana on that, I'm kind of locked out of casting my Forging the Anchor. So I think I'm just going to start by casting Forging the Anchor. So again, we're going to look at the top 5. We can take any number of artifacts and put the rest on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that was pretty classic. These are not the most powerful hits, but we did get a decent number of them. You do tend to hit lands and other forgings fairly often, but I will say I'm not displeased with that one. So here I'll just cast another Frogmite, attack for 2 damage, go to the next turn. So here, the Springleaf Drum is definitely free because we can get a mana out of something. The Moonsnare prototypes cost blue but make colorless, so they're not super free. We're going to start on a Thoughtcast, discounted because of our affinity. Draw, another Thoughtcast, that's how this goes. Island, I'm probably just going to run that out because I don't... Technically, I could tap this first and maybe I draw another Seat of the Synod, so I guess we'll do that. Thoughtcast, draw. Alright, we found a plating, that's a big deal. Plating is 2 to play and 1 to equip, so we're going to play a land here. We have 2 mana this turn. There's no way for us to go positive even off these drums and prototypes, so I know that we're not getting a plating down this turn. Our affinity count is 5, so what I'm going to do is spend a mana on a drum. Our affinity count is 6. Spend a mana on Ginger Brute. Our affinity count is 7. I'll cast Companion for free. Then I'll use Companion and Springleaf Drum to cast a prototype. And the reason I'm casting this instead of holding it is because I don't think obviously we're goldfishing, so I don't know how good the channel ability is, but I do still like developing the mana, because if we do find another Thoughtcast or Forging the Anchor effect, I actually do want the mana. So I'm good developing one prototype, and then these are not summoning 6, so we can really get in for 5 more damage. That's 7 damage clocked. They're at 13 hypothetically, and it's turn 4. Next turn, no real hit, but can just go island. Cranial plating. Our artifact count is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're just going to put the cranial plating onto the Ginger Brute and then make the Ginger Brute unblockable. So that's 11 damage, and we have another 8 damage here, so 19. So that goldfish's turn 5 there. I don't think that was the fastest, but it was reasonable. Let's do one more. All right, so looking at this hand, I don't like it. We have 3 kind of late game cards. I think Forging the Anchor is kind of more expensive than Thought Monitor most of the time. I would rather play a Forging the Anchor for 3 mana than a 3 mana Thought Monitor, but here we don't have blue mana. We do have a 0-drop. I think if we had a Springleaf Drum in here instead of like Kappa Cannoneer, I would keep, but we're going to mulligan. I'm just going to hit restart. This is reasonable. I'm going to put back a Patchwork, I think. All right, we're going to say we're on the play here. All right, so how do we want to do this? So, okay, you could play Ginger Brute on turn 1 and attack for 1, but I think I want to go Moonsnare Prototype on turn 1. Turn 2, I'll play the Patchwork, and then I'll tap the Patchwork and the Prototype to get the Ginger Brute down, I think. So, turn 1, Moonsnare Prototype. Next turn, we draw an Ornithopter. That's pretty good. Play a second land. Affinity count is 2. Play Patchwork. Tap Patchwork and Moonsnare to make a colorless mana. Cast a Ginger Brute. Trigger this. I'm going to be lazy. I'm just going to add a counter like that. And I may as well play this Ornithopter, I think. Get in for 1. So turn 2, 1 damage marked. Then next turn, Frogmite. 1, 2, 3, 4. Frogmite's free right now. So I will... Let's see. I don't think Ornithopter needs to attack this turn, because I don't think we're going to develop a Cranial Plating after the Forging the Anchor, because that's 3 mana to develop. So I'm going to assume Ornithopter is good to tap to Moonsnare Prototype. So I can leave the Frogmite back on hypothetical defense here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make colorless through that, blue and 1, and we're going to Forge an Anchor. 1, 2, nice, 3, 4, 5. Now, I would say this is pretty representative. Again, you're getting 4 cards, I think like 20% of the time, and you're getting 3 or 4 cards like 50% of the time or something crazy. I'll try to put the actual numbers in the video description. So I'll put Thoughtcast on the bottom, and I will take these cards into my hand. So now, Frogmite is free, trigger Patchwork. We haven't made a land drop yet this turn. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 artifacts in play. So our whole hand is free. I'm going to start with a Thought Monitor, because if I get another Patchwork Automaton, I would consider not playing the Ornithopter this turn maybe. So we'll cast Thought Monitor, add a counter, draw 2 cards. There's our Cannoneer and an island. Okay. So actually, I am potentially interested in Ornithopter staying in hand to trigger the Cannoneer the turn after we play it, assuming this hypothetical game goes that long. But I'm not playing this turn. I'll play it next turn, and then I would be attacking the turn after. That's 2 draw steps to find any artifact, including an artifact land. I'm going to just run out the Ornithopter. So we'll go Companion, add a counter, Ornithopter, add a counter. And this is turn 3, and we're attacking for 7, 8, 9, 10. Or does this have summoning sickness? It doesn't matter. That's not what this video is about. We'll go next. Island. So again, nothing changes, but we're pretty well set up. So we're going to tap 1, 2, 3. We're going to improvise. Improvise, improvise. Get a Cannoneer down. Trigger Cannoneer. Trigger Automaton. Attack for, a bunch. That's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 17. And if the opponent's somehow not dead, our next turn we're getting a Ginger Brute. We're triggering Cannoneer, so it's unblockable. We have 2 unblockable Ginger Brutes. This is going to be a 9/9. So we're wrapping things up pretty nicely on, I think, turn 4. So again, I'm not the best pilot, and those probably were not the best draws, but I think in the hypothetical Goldfish world, this deck's really, really powerful, and I do think it's actually hard to interact with. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you liked having this additional Goldfish on the end. I may start including this potentially even with like paper if I get a webcam set up at my desk that can do that. I will probably only Goldfish on deck techs when it's things like Storm, or this isn't a Storm deck, but it's proactive enough that you get to see what it does pretty well in a Goldfish. I probably won't Goldfish things like Blue-White Control or Esper Miracles. I just don't think that's really worth it because they're so reactive, right? Anyway, this video's kind of developed into a little bit longer than I intended, but I hope you guys don't mind the long form. Let me know if you think it's worth my time to be expanding these like this. I think it's fairly interesting. And like I said, I'm really excited about this deck. I do think this deck is going to be a format boogeyman going forward. So we're going to have to keep our eye on it. It's actually kind of scary. But this has been your most recent deck tech for $30 budget vintage MTG. Drop me a line in the comments. Let's talk about what happens next in this format, all right? Thanks, guys.